Welcome, my brothers and my sisters. Today in this video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at a variety of modalities and approaches when it comes to dealing with trauma, PTSD, CPTSD, and then some. We're going to look into it. I'm going to do my best to be a brother from another mother, bring out some perspectives, and walk through some of the aspects of help that are available when it comes to navigating trauma and what does it look like for a Christian and a believer? So today we're going to get into that. Welcome to the Healing and Freedom Journey. Your brother from another mother, Mark DeJesus, is here bringing you insights along the way. I'm all about mental, emotional, and relationship health. And if you are too, you have arrived at a great place. As I mentioned in this broadcast, what I want to do is I want to dive into treatment and help for trauma, PTSD, and CPTSD. And those who see the impact of trauma in their lives, you often find yourself navigating this complex landscape of trauma recovery by exploring what help and what treatment can look like. And what I want to do is I want to take my experience of working with people over the decades in navigating aspects of healing in my own life, my pastoral experience, work in ministry, both in teaching and one-on-one sessions and group sessions and everything that I've learned along the way to bring some observations to this. I'm going to do the best that I can to bring some grounded perspectives and give you some things to think about, things to understand. And my greatest aim, though, is to encourage you along the journey because this is a journey. And when it comes to trauma, it's important to remember that each of us learn, heal, and process in a variety of ways. So what helps one person may not exactly be just as helpful for another person. So you have to keep that in mind. So the information I'm giving here is to provide an overview. I'm not necessarily going to get into the nitty-gritty details. And I want to do my best to kind of go, here's what it looks like, explain it in simple terms, give some feedback, talk from someone who is a Christian believer, and what are helpful perspectives that we can keep in mind. And disclaimer, this is not meant to replace any help that you're getting or any counsel or feedback that you're getting. So I hope you understand that, and you understand that with all the resources and materials that I produce. So want to get into this, and I pray that this will be helpful for your life and for your journey. Today, I'm going to get into the common therapeutic avenues when it comes to psychology, therapy, treatments that are offered. There's going to be a part 2 of this that's in the works, where I'll get into many of the Christian perspectives on it, where ministries like inner healing and those kind of things, I'm going to do my best to navigate through the waters of that too, because I've had a lot of experience with it and working on that to share that too and provide some feedback. Because my overall goal is to be reasonable, but to also share concerns, share some of the valleys and difficulties that I see along the way that I think could be encouraging to your life and to your journey. So let me give you just some introductory thoughts and just some things up front. And first and foremost, the subject of trauma brings out a lot of heavily opinionated perspectives. It's understandable, especially when you're somebody who's navigating through it and you've been in the trenches of it and the difficulties. So it's understandable, but with that in mind, my goal is, again, to just provide some grounded insights. Many people, when it comes to trauma help, they often find a certain modality that really helps them. And it is a common pattern that then they become evangelists for that particular method, right? So whatever you use, you tell everyone, you need to do this, right? And I want to encourage people to not push on a modality on somebody else. You need to do this. This is what's going to help you, because everybody has their own journey. Everybody has their own timing. I think it's healthy for those of you that are navigating your journey to express it from a place of, you know what? This is what was helpful for me. I found this to be helpful in my life, in my journey. So that's my recommendation. My goal is not to argue or debate about techniques. I'll share some concerns, but I want to try to maintain a balanced perspective in this. So it's not my aim to be super judgy or whatever that means over whatever process you're working and going through. But however, I want to speak to some observations. Let me remind you, there's no magic technique. There's no magic formula. Trauma healing is work, and it is a journey. And there is a pattern in society where people promote quick fixes. There is a mindset that I think people have where when it comes to trauma, you got to find this special thing, this special person that brings you into a room, and you have something special that's done to you, and boom, this fixes you. No matter what tools and avenues you utilize, it's work. The healing journey is work, meaning that it's process, it's time, it's layers, it's learning, it's stumbling, it's getting back up again, it's continuing to relearn, to heal, to practice new things. And I always want to encourage you to keep allowing yourself to gain a variety of understanding and perspectives that are helpful to you. There's many things that I share. Some of it goes right over people's heads. That's fine. And some of it lands. Pay attention to what lands and what's helpful. What I do want to warn you of is to beware of trauma quick fix hustlers, because they're out there. Those who promise quick fixes, silver magic bullets, and they will demean other practices, put other things down, and to promote their avenue. And this will be a cure-all. This is going to fix you. Don't look for quick fixes. And I want to be protective of you in that, because learning how to relate to yourself in a new way takes time and practice. Learning how to relate to God in renewed ways takes time and practice. And when trauma has taken place in your life, it really crushes a lot of perspectives that take time and work to heal through. And God is very capable of walking us through a healing journey, but we often get pulled in. And many who have trauma come under the mindset of there's something I'm missing, there's something I'm not doing, what's the secret ingredient? And there's many who take advantage of that. I want to quote Pete Walker simply because the statement fits. It's very well said. Of course, he wrote the book about complex trauma. And he said there's numerous one-dimensional approaches to trauma that bill themselves as cure-alls. Moreover, working with simplistic approaches, and listen to this, working with simplistic approaches can leave you stranded in toxic shame when you do not achieve the touted results. I see this not just in mental health, psychology, trauma help, self-help, whatever you want to call it. I also see it in church and ministry avenues that are often promoted when it comes to helping people navigate through trauma. You promise big results, and then many people go into toxic shame and they go, what's wrong with me? Because I don't seem to be making that same kind of progress. We start to compare ourselves to others. We start to spin. So we have to be aware of how much shame can impact our journey, because shame will heighten the sense of you are very broken, something's wrong with you, and you need to get fixed or else you're unlovable. And then accuse you along the way as you're trying to take steps to heal very challenging wounds that have to do with physical abuse, have to do with sexual abuse, have to do with emotional abuse, and a large-scale experience of childhood neglect. This takes time to work through. Okay, so let me get into some of the modalities by giving you big picture perspective. When it comes to working through trauma, there's some things to be aware of. Number one, at the top of that list, teaching, learning, and insight. You're going to need to learn, relearn, keep learning, because this helps you to gain perspectives and insights on understanding what you've been through and how it impacts where you are and where you're going and how you think. Now, many can get stuck in over-evaluating, reading so much that they don't take action. And we all have to recognize that in our life and our journey, right? We just think, I need to read another book or read another thing. And really what we need to do is actually give ourselves room to apply what we're learning. For example, there's aspects of reparenting that I worked on and studied on for my own life. And it was about 2 years of just that subject, of allowing myself to gain, and I'm using that term, and there's many things under that umbrella in what that looked like for me. And just allowing myself to journal and heal through and work through a number of areas of my life that I needed to walk some healing process with. And so getting the teaching and insight will help you gain some self-awareness. Self-awareness will help you to see your emotional life for what it is, not deny it, not drown in it, And that takes practice. And from a Christian standpoint, we're learning to develop discernment, the ability to discern what's going on in our life and our journey. And trauma is one of many factors that enhances a sense of distortion of how we see ourselves. So always learning, always gaining teaching, gaining insight. And many of you have been blessed by stuff I share and a variety of other people as well too. I celebrate that. But working through shame is going to be the biggest part of this, because shame will cloud your vision. It will promote shame attacks within some of the trauma hits that the recall that comes up can produce a lot of shame attacks. And that shame will cause you to panic, rush to hurry up and fix yourself. Or I got to find a right approach. And I encourage all of us to gain helpful understanding of working through shame, because it really, really messes up how we navigate the healing journey. Now, before I even get to you going to get help from somebody or a number of areas, I want to encourage you to recognize a big part of trauma healing is in your social connections and interactions. Sometimes we make things complicated, and certainly brokenness is complicated, but healing is simple. I didn't say it was easy, but it involves the simple fundamental things that we need to get back to. Areas and experiences where we practice feeling safe and recovering a sense of safety. And so it's kind of on two levels when I say social interactions and connections. One is the professional ones that you have. Mentors, coaches, pastors, practitioners, therapists, counselors, where it's a professional relationship or a formal relationship where you're working on areas of your life. How you relate to God's love, how you relate to your thoughts, how you relate to the scriptures and prayer. But don't negate the beauty and power of friendships, healthy family members, if they are there, other believers, support groups, or even just arenas where you're just interacting and practicing. Because I find that so much of healing is actually in real life. There's a lot of IRL going on here in the journey, where yes, it's important to have that specific input and help, but your everyday interactions, you're actually learning to practice that you are safe. Because part of safety is learning how to dwell in the secret place of the Most High, as to use the scriptures, to dwell and abide under the shadow of the Almighty, to recognize the safety of who God is and his love. But that also needs to be practiced at gradual, incrementally increasing levels where we learn to interact with our neighbor and learn to interact with people in closer relationships, where it's not just based on us talking about our traumas. It's based on just interacting in real life with each other, with one another, learning to practice out that we're safe. So I got to say that up front before I even get to therapy. Now, most therapies are going to kind of go from either a top down or a bottom up. And what we mean by that, top is your thinking pattern. So just think of your body. Top down meaning dealing with your thoughts, dealing with your perspectives, your beliefs, therapeutic conversations, counseling, where you can learn to observe how you think and relate to your thoughts, processing it out with someone who's trained, has some experience, you develop good rapport with, where you challenge negative thoughts, where you learn to embrace new coping strategies, where you learn to reframe and reinterpret situations. So that's kind of the top-down approach. And it can be really effective providing the person knows how to talk through their problems and talk through their emotions and talk through their pain and talk through their struggle. And that's going to be a place where this can be effective. I'll get into some of those modalities in just a moment. I'll get into medication. What role does this play? And how the role of medication relates. Now, I really encourage you, if you want to understand medication, especially from my standpoint, I did a long form on that. That you can, the Christian mental health and medication, I want you to check that out and walk through that, because that's not a quick thing. That takes time. I got to take the lens back a bit and walk you through it. Okay, so the bottom up is more referring to the body, your actual physiology, your nervous system. And It's allowing the body and being intentional about having experiences, tools, and practices that help us to viscerally, I'll use that word, work through many of the areas of helplessness or anger or anxiety that come out as a result of trauma. And most people that I've talked to need a combination of working on their thoughts, but they also need understandings of physiological practices, insights to help their nervous system get regulated. And I found this over the decades to be very, very true. Our body is the last place to get the signal of where we're going. Because when our nervous system gets conditioned in a certain way, it takes time, but it takes profound practice and experiences where we experience taking new steps. We experience God's love. We experience his grace. So we have to give ourselves room to experience renewed journeys, new steps, new ways of thinking, and actually practicing. And I have to make this clear. Help is only going to be as helpful as your active participation. So when you go into receiving help, don't approach the help in like an emotional amoeba kind of state, meaning like just land here, somebody do something to me or for me. This is something that actually, it's like going to the gym, but in an emotional and spiritual way, where you're learning to do the work. So be involved in the personal work that is going on, because that's going to bring out the greatest benefit to these processes. Most importantly, everything needs to be rooted in and flow out of a lens of compassionate grace. Compassion points us to love. Grace points us to the work, the empowering work of Jesus Christ in your life. And I will never, never stop talking on and emphasizing on the need, because it's life-changing, but it's also a journey of learning. And so one of the keys of this therapy process and recovery process is learning to bring a loving embrace to the places of your heart that are damaged, broken, feel unlovable, feel unworthy, to experience the love of God, but allowing that to birth new levels of hope and faith where you also take new steps. Now, let me remind you of some reasons why therapy and counseling can be helpful versus doing things by yourself. Because many write to me, can I heal through things just by myself? Well, a lot of the work is by yourself, and the daily work, how you face the day, how you go about your day, the mindsets you put into practice, the way you relate to God and yourself and others. But we need help. And I want to start off by saying we all need help, whether you admit that or not. We all need help. We all need people in our lives that provide helpful feedback. And most people do not have a good resource of counsel around them. And counsel is a very biblical thing. We receive the counsel of our community, our church community. We were meant to experience that from our family. However, many come from families where that was not given. And many find themselves very alone in their life and their journey, and they don't feel like they have a good sounding board of helpful counsel. Many do, and I'm grateful for that because I believe it's such a powerful thing in our journey. But having a sense of counsel, many people say, I don't have it. And so you may find yourself going, I don't really have a lot of good input. I don't have a lot of good relationships around me. So you may have to pay someone to sit down with and process. That's fine. Don't see that as something as an indictment against you, because many, many others are in that same boat. I also think it's very helpful to have dedicated time where you sit down and focus on the areas of your life and your heart. I don't think that humans in general make time for that in a way of working on their journey. We kind of let these issues just float around and often torment us, and we suffer in silence. And so it's helpful to have dedicated time. We're so busy with our jobs, our life, our kids, our marriage, our journey, church, whatever, that we often neglect this time to just sit down and work through things. And I think it's so helpful to have an outside observer, someone who can make objective observations in love and in grace, who's not in our head all the time and can stand from the outside and see things. That kind of input is very valuable, very, very important. And the beauty and power of having someone who's empathetic, they know how to listen. They know they're trained, they have experience, but it's not just a clinical thing where they check the boxes off and they have a diploma and they have some credentials, but that they have an ability. And that's something that's very special, to be seen, to be heard, to be able to process it out. Okay, so with that said, let me get into, I'll start first with top-down approach. And the most famous one you all know of is cognitive behavioral therapy. And this kind of approach, and it's otherwise known as CBT. And this is the most common. If many of you have gone to a therapist and you've done what's called talk, you sit down, you talk through things. Most likely that therapist has been influenced and trained in what they've labeled as cognitive behavioral therapy. And it's doing exactly that. It's looking at your cognition, the way that you think, the way that you see things, the way that you believe, and also the link to your behaviors, because it examines the relationship between your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. Sometimes I state it as thoughts, emotions, relationships, right? That's kind of the framework that I work from. CBT is based on the idea that your thoughts influence your feelings and your feelings influence your behaviors. And it emphasizes that negative or unhelpful thought patterns can lead to negative emotions and negative behaviors, unhealthy behaviors. So in CBT, you want to identify patterns of thinking that worsen, that work against your emotional health, that work against, for example, even regulating your emotions. I did not know how to manage my emotions. I could professionally, but in my own personal life, the ups and downs and the spin outs and anxiety and shame attacks and all that, they were very treacherous. And so consistent work with someone, and it takes time. It doesn't happen in weeks. It doesn't happen in months. It takes time. In fact, I encourage people, let go of any deadline of you to get anywhere in the sense of like your emotions. Just keep daily growing and working at it, because that's really what this is about. But anyways, going back to CBT, it's the most common form of therapy that's used. Again, it's targeting how you see things in your thinking patterns. CBT can help you look at your thoughts in a productive way and help you see the errors. So for example, someone who's had trauma typically feels very unsafe. I mean, a lot of people feel unsafe in general, even without trauma. But this feeling of unsafety gets very magnified. And what can happen is we can take that sense of unsafety from experiences we've had and we transpose it now to the world around us. No one's safe. The world is unsafe. Nobody is safe, right? Helpful CBT will help you to realize, okay, that has affected how you see the whole world now. Let's start to work through that and navigate that. You may sit down with someone and they can help you point out that you respond to your feelings with shame. You drown in them, you shut them down, you diminish them, you dismiss them, you're hard on yourself, you have a toxic interpreter. You can start to come to that realization. And there's a variety of different kind of CBT methodology. It's often called talk therapy. What you will often hear online, especially, is many people that talk, they downplay, they talk down. That talk therapy. How much are we going to talk about this? But don't minimize the power of having a very fruitful interaction. I've experienced over and over and over again people saying to me, this interaction was so helpful for me. The light bulbs went off, and all we did was just have a loving, fruitful interaction and conversation about what they were battling with. Because that's how I try to approach any interactions I have with people. It's just interacting as a brother, providing some feedback. So if the client, so to speak, you being the client, and the therapist are a good fit, this can be powerful, but that takes time. Do you know it takes a while for a clinician to get to know you, get to know your battle and your journey. Because many people, they will approach and maybe their first session, it was okay, it wasn't that great. And they go, forget it, I'm done. I encourage you to slow down a little bit, be a little bit patient with the process, take some time to really see if there's that, because you have to give therapists room, counselors room, that maybe that day it didn't click so well. It doesn't mean that all of a sudden they're not going to be a helpful voice. Talk therapy is only going to be helpful to if you are willing to learn how to talk. There are many people I've met with in sessions that they actually don't know how to talk. I'm not saying that to be condemning or mean. They don't know how to talk about what they're feeling. They don't. I've been put into many situations where I was called on as kind of like a crisis intervention. Oh, Pastor Mark, you help people. I need your help in this area. And I go sit down, and the person doesn't know how to talk. And I can't force them. I can invite them, but I can't force them to talk. And so sometimes people, they may struggle to talk or work through. They need training in that. I help people at times from the ground up in just having a conversation. Even in my pastoring, I had sessions with people where I said, okay, we're going to practice you walking into the room, and I'm going to be a stranger, and we're going to have an introductory conversation. And I literally had them walk out of the room, knock on the door, walk in, I shook their hand, and we had practice conversations, because we're trying to work on all these mental health issues. We got to be able to have a conversation. So show up as a willing participant, and don't make the therapist do all the work for you. In fact, the way I approach help in my life is I'm coming in with the work. No therapist is going to do more work than I'm doing for me, right? Because if the therapist is doing more work than you are, it's creating a dynamic that's not going to be fruitful for the long term. Now, CBT does have its limitations in the sense because you need to process emotions in your body. But it is found that people with trauma, with especially like PTSD, that those who go to CBT, their symptoms over time actually lower. Research has shown this, but recovery often needs other tools as well too. I'm going to get into some of those, and the next one is going to be exposure therapy. Now, this is not exactly the same as what I talk about exposure when it comes to OCD. So I'm talking about exposure for trauma. And when it comes to this, do I have this on my slide yet? It involves the gradual and repeated exposure to something that triggers a fear response within us. So this is important. Gradual, we got to say that word up front. This is not just throwing you into the deep end of the water, but we're going to make gradual movements towards it, because that's the most effective when it comes to even working through the phobic aspects that trauma brings out, the obsessive, the avoidance patterns, right? But repeated, meaning we're going to have to stay at this and stay at this and stay at this. And many people have to start small and move their way through. Because the goal, and I put some of these on the slide here, is to confront our emotional avoidance patterns. That's one of the things that trauma produces. To learn to develop new coping mechanisms. When the shame rises up, when the flashback rises up, having new ways that we approach it. Reducing distress. So learning over time how to relate to our emotions in renewed ways. To learn, and this is really good, to learn that feared consequences are not occurring. It takes time for the body to go, okay, I'm not in danger anymore. I'm not in that place anymore, even though that moment, that time is still trying to live with me. And I find where great things happen is when someone develops renewed references, meaning that maybe they say the world is not safe. They start to learn and go, well, some people aren't safe, and I'm going to be discerning of that. However, there's some great people to connect with in this life, and I'm open to that. Right? And then you practice it, have a good interaction with somebody. You have a good relationship that develops, and that now gets embedded within you as a new reference. I'm all about empowering people to experience renewed experiences in their life. So there's a number of ones I can throw out here. Again, I'm not trying to cover everything, but one that you can read about. It's called written exposure therapy. WET, the abbreviations. It's talk therapy. It involves writing about a traumatic experience, like writing it down, and then talking about it with a therapist. So you write it down, kind of document it, and then you process it out, meaning working through the ways it made you feel, working through seeing those emotions and being kind to them, letting those emotions work through, and finding ways where grieving can happen and take place. When I was reading about this, I did see where a lot of times it's short term. This is a short term. You're going to do this for like maybe 5 sessions or something like that to get the wheels moving. Narrative exposure therapy, NET, and this isn't to be confused with neuro-emotional therapy. A lot of terms, a lot of words. I'm trying to like not clog up the process with a lot of unnecessary terms. But this is interesting because it helps you to look at your biographical narrative of your journey. So it's not focused on the trauma, it's focused on your journey with the trauma within it, if that makes sense. I find it helpful, and I've said this many times, I'll continue to say it. I find it helpful to journal your journey. Take a timeline and just, you can do it on a big piece of paper and just keep going and add another piece of paper if you need to. And start with childhood and just mark down the ups and downs. You could put a date on it. The big high points, great moments in your life that you remember, but also the valleys. To document it and to recognize it. This is homework. It takes work, but to recognize, how did those experiences influence you? It's not just the bad, it's also the good as well too. Okay, so I got this off of a website. It's called Treatment Collaborative for Traumatized Youth. And it talked about this process. With the guidance of the therapist, I'm quoting from their website, a patient establishes a chronological narrative of his or her life, concentrating mainly on their traumatic experience. So this is different from what I just mentioned, the ups and the downs. That was just a side. Okay, you're concentrating on the traumatic experience, but also incorporating positive events. So you're kind of putting the trauma within the landscape of your journey. It's believed that this contextualizes the network of cognitive, affective, and sensory memories of a patient's trauma. By expressing the narrative, the patient fills in details of fragmentary memories and develops a coherent autobiographical story. In doing so, the memory of a traumatic episode is refined and understood, because a big part of trauma healing is what happened to you becoming a part of your story. It's a redemptive story. It's a journey that God is doing a healing, redemptive work in, but it's messy and it can be dark. And when it comes to narrative, there's so much fragmentation that happens with trauma. Memories are not even in sequence. We just feel more shattered about it. This can kind of help bring some nurturing organization to it. And I find it always helpful for mental health to work on our story. What's the story that I'm listening to? To use a biblical phrase in Isaiah, the phrase, whose report will you believe, right? It's like, what's the report over my life? And learning to embrace the narrative of God's healing work in my past, present, and where I'm heading to in my future. So I'm always encouraging, what's the narrative you're listening to? What's the interpretation of your life and in your journey? Okay, there's other aspects. There's imaginal exposure. That's just a fancy way of saying you're vividly recalling it, right? While someone's working with it through you. In vivo, just talking about in life, basically, meaning you're facing real life situations, facing a real life object that triggers a trauma-related anxiety. The typical example is like, okay, you're going to go see a snake because you had a traumatic incident with a snake, and you're going to go to the zoo and you're just going to look at the snake and you're going to see it. And then maybe at some point you're going to see one in your yard and you're going to practice being calm around it. Right? So this is facing stuff in real life. People I know who had fear of crowds or fear of certain places to go to. Like, okay, I remember telling one person, hey, we're going to go to the mall. You want to go to the mall? And I took a guy to the mall. We're going to walk around. We're going to practice. I'm going to walk with you. and we're just gonna do the work. People that have fear aspects come out of trauma of driving or even just talking to people. Okay, we're gonna practice, and we're gonna prove your nervous system that you're okay. In interoceptive exposure, it involves exposure to physical sensations that are related. So it's you working on those sensations, because typically when you have a flashback or you have a shame attack or an anxiety attack, there's a very physiological of understanding where it goes, right? Like in your chest, in your neck, you start to feel like a headache. Do you start to feel like you just want to take a nap and kind of dissociate and check out? Many people, they bump into that. A lot of complex trauma people, they get to like this exhaustion thing kicks up and they need a nap, but it's actually their part of their fawning response. It's part of the fight or flight response that just kicks up. Adrenaline hits and then massive fatigue hits. And they just kind of go, oh, this is too much. I watch that over and over again. In pastoring, I see it to this day of people they just get overwhelmed and it hits this like fatigue and they kind of check out. Learning how to relate to that. How, hey, I see myself kind of checking out. I feel that overwhelm. It's okay. I'm letting myself stretch a little bit. I'm learning to relate to myself in loving patterns. Now, a process that when I research and read into it, I find a lot of helpful insights for me and for those I've helped. And that's I always get tongue twisted. Dialectical behavioral therapy, DBT. I remember over the years, especially early on, where I was working with people on emotions, doing a lot of work on emotions, and a friend of mine who's also he's a, I guess you could say, a colleague. He's in the mental health space, and he said you're doing a lot of dialectical work, and as I began to dive into it, boy, some of the workbooks have great exercises and great things. Okay, so to explain it, dialectical, it's about opposing thoughts that come together. Many people that have OCD have trouble with this. They have trouble with two things that have validity to them colliding. Learning to relate to thoughts and emotions that seem to be in conflict. Dialectical, it involves the collision of acceptance and change. Do I have that on my slide here? No, I don't have that on my slide. I thought I did. Dialectical involves the collision of acceptance and change. Think about that for a moment. What is acceptance? Loving compassion. It's okay that I'm okay. God loves me. I love myself. I'm in love. I'm safe. But also change. I got to take a step. There's new things I need to embrace. I've got to be willing to let faith put a step into action and practice it. And many people get stuck in the midst of that, right? We struggle with sometimes we see love only as just being this comforting thing, and we don't see the empowering aspect of love. I've got to take a step, right? So DBT was developed originally, and it's a lady named Marsha Linehan, you can go look that up, for treatment of borderline personality disorder, okay? And so it's a type of CBT that combines mindfulness and relaxation strategies. It's learning how to relate to your emotional spinouts, where you work through emotional dysregulation. And I put it there on the slide, your poor ability to manage emotions or keep emotions within an acceptable range, right? Where it's not suppressed, check out. It's also not drowning. Learning to tolerate distressing emotions without going to substance abuse, aggression, or other unhealthy coping patterns. This takes practice of learning. Hang in there, hang in there, hang in there, hang in there. You're feeling all this stuff. It's okay. It's okay. Don't suppress it. Don't check out. Let it work its way through. And there can be a lot of great tools. I worked through one of the manual workbooks, and there's a number of people I've coached that have used those books as well too. I don't have a specific one to recommend. There's a number you can try out there. But the philosophy, and I'll give you some of these, is number one, there's nothing inherently bad about having difficult emotions. And we as Christians can tend to be very prone to quickly judging in a judgmental, condemning, shame, guilt-based way about emotions. We feel angry, we judge it, we condemn it right away. We feel anxious, we condemn it, judge it right away. So we got to loosen that up in the sense of we're emotional beings. We're looking and working and navigating through these emotions. These thoughts and emotions do not define who you are. That creates a healthy vision of separation in the sense of like, I have these emotions. It doesn't mean this is who I am, but this is something that is working through me. It also encourages, and I encourage this too, the journey of learning to lovingly accept yourself, of practicing, okay, it's okay that I'm not okay right now, to be a compassionate witness to your journey, and learning healthy ways to cope when difficult feelings arise. And one of the most helpful for me comes down to anxiety, guilt, and anger of when they arise and they come in like they break the door down, of learning how to, and one of the helpful things for me was just, okay, it's all right. This emotion's rising up right now. It needs to work its way through. I'm not going to feed it. I'm not going to suppress it. I'm going to learn in this. And I'm just going to keep allowing God's love and grace to help me learn over time as I practice. And this takes years and years of work. Okay. So anyways, that's another perspective. Another one that many people ask me about is EMDR. Eye movement, desensitization, and reprocessing. A lot of big words there. So EMDR is better. This is a very interesting one, and people could have a variety of opinions on it. That's fine. It was developed by Francine Shapiro, and I read her book. She wrote a book called Getting Past Your Past. And what she shares is how she accidentally stumbled upon a physiological tool to work through difficult memories. It actually came about in the 80s. She shares she was taking a walk and she noticed that her disturbing thoughts were lessening in intensity. And she made this observation. How she made this observation, I'd like to have a little more info, but it's all right. She observed that when she was having these disturbing thoughts, her eyes were spontaneously moving from side to side. And she began to experiment with this. Is there something in eye movement that helps the brain, just that physiological action? Could this be, and I'm putting my own language to this, could this be helpful in a way of like the sigh? What's a sigh? Taking in a deep breath. What does that do? It's a physiological thing that invites you into letting go, entering into peace, right? And so she began to experiment with this and working with people with distressing thoughts. And she found it seemed to reduce the negative emotional charge, to help people navigate through those emotions and memories in a better way. So she continued to develop this, and it went into research. And then they started researching it and documenting it. And so EMDR involves a sense of what you can call dual awareness. You're conscious of where you are here now, right? So you're not like checking out. You're focusing it on the memory, but they use these bilateral movements. And what it does is it seems to mimic, not to get too nerdy, but it seems to mimic REM sleep. So the stages of sleep that you go into, where REM kicks in, your eyes start to do a movement. And there's something about that, because many of you know when you go to sleep, there is a bit of a cleaning out that your brain does with memories and with emotions that take place. That's why a lot of people say, let me sleep on it. It's a good thing to practice. Now, some can get into where they'll use tapping or listening to like a tone, or maybe they have something in their hands. We've seen where like tapping, you can't see my lap, but like tapping your lap in a steady and slow motion, right? And it is interesting because it invites our physiology into the process of healing through memories. There was a time in my journey where I had gotten some help, and this was utilized in some things and memories that I went back to in ministry and stuff about my overwhelm in being a dad and being a parent and working through some of those areas. It helped me to face myself in renewed ways, in a compassionate way, right? And so EMDR lowers the disturbance related to the event And so, but this is, I do find that some people kind of go to this as like, I got this memory. I got to go get an EMDR, right? Kind of like, I got to go get the oil change. And I don't know that I recommend it being used like that. I think it's used well in conjunction with getting regular ongoing counsel, therapy, help. Does that make sense? You can research that on your own. And so this work of memories, it takes time. It takes time of getting out some of the battles. It takes time to see what's going to help. It takes time to put it into practice. Another one I'll talk about is family systems therapy. And sometimes, and again, terminologies can get confusing. There's something called family systems therapy, and there's something called internal family systems therapy. Okay? I'll explain it, and I just want to give you a couple helpful takeaways, because let's go to the FST first. This approach views the family. It sees the interconnected emotional interactions that take place within the home. And it emphasizes how interactions and patterns contribute to the family members, the overall family, and how people think, emote, and relate. It involves learning to see the dysfunctional patterns in your family and how you related and how you communicated. Now, those of you that are in your 20s and you want to learn some of this stuff, it's great. But, and I'm not saying don't, but it takes time of you going into adulthood and stepping out of your family to kind of realize many of the dysfunctional patterns. There are many that are, still living at home with their parents and so forth, and you're trying to figure it out, and you're trying to do all your family system stuff and things like that. And it's like, you really need to get out of the environment so then see it and reflect on it. Hopefully that makes sense. It's not until like later in adulthood. So it's not uncommon for people in their 30s to go, oh my goodness. 40s, oh my goodness. 50s, oh my goodness. Where it hits you, what you grew up with. 60s, yeah. It's not uncommon. Because the older you get, especially if you become married, you become a parent, you have children, you have grandchildren, you start to see things differently. Okay? So I'll briefly mention internal family systems therapy. It's like IFS, the abbreviation, yes. It's rooted in the family systems therapy, but it goes into, there's an internal family system within you, and you have parts and subparts. I haven't really got into this aspect of it. Some of it can get a little goofy, in my opinion. Okay? So I haven't gotten deep into that aspect of it. But going back to what I got here, the family systems is what I found some helpful things is working with yourself compassionately, recognizing the inner critic, because man, it's so common that you internalize your family's way of living and relating in the dysfunctional areas, and it becomes an internal critic in your own journey. Hold on, my phone's ringing. It's very common that, for example, if you had a mom who's very critical, that becomes the voice of your inner critic. If you were abandoned as a child, you may neglect your need for self-care and you dismiss your pain. It's part of that inner critic disconnect. Your father's emotionally passive, or he's an addict. And this drives you to perform for love and seek for love in all the wrong places, or live as a perfectionist. I'm a big believer in understanding the family you grew up with and how that imprint impacted your life. There's no way around it. It is very, very important. But also learning to develop self-awareness, okay, self-regulation, and learning to lead yourself. I'm a big believer in understanding family dynamics, because when you add childhood trauma, you have a shattered perspective of your identity. You often have codependent patterns of relating. You become at war within yourself. You blame yourself. You become perfectionistic. And there's this aspect of a young part of you. And I use that metaphorically. I don't mean that literally. There's a emotionally undeveloped aspect to you in certain areas. Many people can be like, they can appear very mature in professional areas of their life, but yet be highly immature in many personal areas of their life. This is a very common pattern. So they usually don't get help until the personal areas start leaking into the professional areas. And now the way they relate at work and the way their work day and it's interfering, then they start getting help. So there's two concepts to this that I think, I mentioned this, working with yourself with compassion, recognizing the inner critic, learning self-awareness, self-regulation, and learning to lead yourself. And there's two concepts I find very important and helpful for me. The concept of the inner child concept. And again, it's a metaphorical thing, but it helps you picture the younger version of yourself that was neglected and traumatized. And those areas are unresolved, so it's kind of left hanging back there. Help you to see yourself from that lens, because typically we look at ourselves with shame. And so to see it from a childlike state, to get those areas caught back up, I think this is a very, very helpful concept for many. And the whole concept of reparenting, because I think everyone is learning to reparent themselves. And I believe reparenting is part of being a Christian. I think it's embedded into the whole Christian life, because we have a new father, we have a new identity, we have a new family, we have a new destiny, we have a new environment, right? And God our Father is reparenting, and guess what? God starts from the ground up. He doesn't build his foundation on top of our parents' foundation, although he uses our parents, right? And wants to use our parents in healthy ways. But Jesus made this statement when he said, you want to enter the kingdom, you got to be born again. He didn't say, come into the kingdom, you need to be made new. He said, no, we got to start over. So I find that this is not only healing and recovery, this is in the gospel. This is framed within the context of being a new creation in Christ Jesus. Paul even made this statement. He said, when I was a child, I spoke like a child, I acted like a child. When I became a man, I put away childish things. But for many of us in certain areas, not all, but in certain areas, we haven't been able to put away childish things. In those moments when we flare up in a shame attack, we go right back to that childlike state. For many people, it's like 11, 12 years old, a teenage state, or maybe even younger, right? And you can even see that. Sometimes those of you that are working through your toxic or dysfunctional parents, you can see them in moments, they regress back to a childlike state. They become bratty, they shut down, they become argumentative, they become nitpicky, they become highly defensive, they become irrational because they're going back to that unhealed childlike state. And so many people, they can feel like they're stuck emotionally. And so this aspect of reparenting, it can be a great, great, helpful perspective for your journey. Then there's the body. We're talking because cognitive behavioral is top down, then exposure. Some of these other ones are getting into the middle ground, a little bit of top thinking and talking out things, but also experiencing. Now we get to somatic, soma, which speaks of the body. And I consider myself a student of pneuma, psyche, and soma. What's that? Spirit, soul, and body. And really cardia, which is the word for heart, because the ministry of Jesus was all about the heart, relational, getting to the root of things, getting to the heart of the matter. But I'm a student of spirituality, our psychology, which is basically a modern word that we use that talks about soul, and physiology. And soma gets into physiology, and it operates on the principle that trauma, stress, and emotional experience can manifest physically in the body, often as tension or pain. There's also a philosophy that trauma can remain stuck in the body. That's a terminology that basically means you have emotions that you felt, but they didn't get a chance to work through you. It got suppressed, shoved down, dissociated, disconnected, whatever. We numb out, we go to drugs, we go to something, addiction, to whatever. There's all different ways that we react. So therefore, this shows up physiologically. So this is body awareness. It helps you notice where does the symptoms show up the most? And you're bringing your physiology into the healing journey. I personally believe that modern civilization is very disconnected from their body. We don't do a lot of physiological experiences. And what do I mean by that? We're very like heady. We go into a classroom, we learn, we write it down, we go to work, do. There's a lot of aspects in our journey that become very robotic. And in the Bible, especially in the Old Testament, it's filled with examples of physiological processing of difficult emotions. Like you even see in the book of Jeremiah, God speaks a strong word and he says, my bowels, my bowels. That's basically what it's interpreted. It's just like this, like, I've got this ache within here. You know, is God saying that he has IBS or diarrhea or constipation? No, he's going, it's showing, I feel it here. And many of you, when you ache and you feel grief, oh, it's right here. It's just that, you hear about a friend or what they're going through and you feel it. There's a lot of physiological connections. We read over it, right? People falling to their knees, tearing their clothes off, shaving their head, right? And our modern thing, we kind of, oh, that's weird. That's kind of embarrassing. Well, it's showing intense emotions and what people went through. I'm not telling you to tear off your clothes and shave your head, but just understand the point here, because today we're very disconnected physiologically. What do I mean? In expression, in interaction. So the only places that we see it today are concerts, sporting events, or maybe at weddings, right? Of the like letting go and expressing. And because the Bible's filled with expression. And people go, well, that's Pentecostal, that's charismatic. No, it's biblical. We've just kind of framed in, we've become very, yes, reserved, but we've often become very disconnected. So it often takes like somebody going to a sporting event and you go, whoa, okay, here they go, right? Or a concert, or a wedding. And often people need a drink of alcohol to loosen them up, to be able to enter there. In my pastoring work, I worked at an Assembly of God church for many, many years, about 12 years. I actually grew up in that church. I had a lot of history there. And then later on, I pastored a non-denominational church. And during that time, in the understanding I've had of spirit, soul, and body, I brought physiology into a lot of our corporate experiences. And many times people were like, oh, good grief, what's he doing now? But very simple things. Like, okay, everyone, we're going to take a deep breath right now. Just take a deep breath, because everyone, I noticed in church gatherings, people come in stressed and depressed. One time I held up a mirror because I'm like, we're gonna practice our awareness of looking at our resting face, right? And helping our resting face. I put up a mirror. We're all gonna see ourselves, right? But I noticed each Sunday they'd come in heavy, discouraged, worn down. So I go, okay, we're gonna take a deep breath. All right. And then I go, okay, everyone, we're going to lift our hands in the air. I don't care if you're Baptist, conservative, Catholic, whatever you come from. Everyone lift your hands. It's all right. It's all right. Everyone just do it. Sometimes at the dinner table, you can ask my wife and kids. I do this with them. In fact, was it 2 nights ago? We sat down for dinner and I go, okay, it's time to pray. I go, hands up. And we just lift our hands up. What I believe so much in bringing our physiology into it. I would have moments into church service where we would just kneel. Let's all just kneel right now. Let's all just kneel and experience this moment before God. I'd have moments of silence. That was actually very awkward for church people. Very, very awkward. That was probably one of the most awkward things we did. We would do a shout. We would even have times of dancing. And I've said this before. I would do things like I'd play a Christian like country line dancing kind of song. And I would go, okay, we're going to go around the room, and we would just hold hands and kind of just hop around and dance around. How are we doing in the house of God? It's biblical. The Bible does say dance before the Lord. We use a lot of Old Testament scriptures when we talk about worship, right? Because it's filled with it. We kind of ignore those. And so I did a lot of things of bringing physiology into it. And a lot of my congregation, a high percentage that had pretty significant mental health battlegrounds, mood issues, severe depression, even schizophrenia, anxiety disorders, severe trauma, very, very severe trauma. And they're like, what's this for? Why am I doing this? And what I would notice is by the end of our time together, their entire countenance changed, their posture changed, they left smiling. And there was a joy that was there. Because, yes, they were with other believers. We experienced interaction with God and each other, but they would pitch a fit through it, right? Something like, I don't want to do this, But simple things like making eye contact, giving a hug to someone appropriately. My wife and I, even on a Sunday, we had to actually demonstrate what a healthy hug looks like, respectable hug. And just and some people, they're not comfortable with a hug at first. You got to understand and have awareness. Don't just go and love bomb hug people, right? But understanding the physiological aspect, because sometimes we make this subject very complicated. I got to learn the science of it. I got to get super training, and I'm not dismissing training of it, but recognizing when you have traumatic flashes, where do you feel it in your body? How can you be kind to that? And how can you walk through practices to engage your physiology in healthy and fruitful ways? Because sometimes what we do is we think like when you feel depressed, sometimes you think lean into the symptoms of it. I'm just going to go to sleep. I'm just going to go to bed. I'm going to shut off the lights. Okay, life happens. But many times what we realize is that what we actually need is the opposite of where we feel to go. We need the garment of praise for the spirit of heaviness. Now, praise is not just the antidote all the time to depression. I don't use that as a blanket thing. However, it is a part of the exchange of and I found many times I wanted to go the exact opposite. The last thing I want to do is praise God right now. But then sometimes I would just lovingly exhort myself and go, Mark, because I talk to myself. That's another wonderful practice, right? You actually need this. So this is helping you to understand working emotions through your body. I've spent times in my early recovery days just praising God and just dancing in my room. And I don't dance really that well, and that's fine. My Norwegian side tends to take over a little bit, but I let the Puerto Rican side kick up and I just have a good time dancing before God and praising him. And I would notice my nervous system appreciated it because there was some stuff going on, some heaviness. You have a sympathetic and a parasympathetic, right? Your sympathetic kicks up, whatever your fight or flight response is. The parasympathetic brings it back to calm. And sometimes you need to walk through a journey of expression to get that emotion working through you. And so even things like crying, and I'll get more into that in future broadcasts as well too. But anyways, so in the somatic, you're practicing awareness of your bodily sensations, especially when it comes to emotions. Where do you feel it? You notice it. You become lovingly curious. And how can I let this through? Oh, maybe I'm going to journal this. I'm going to go for a walk. I'm going to breathe. God, I'm going to give this emotion to you. And there's a physiological, and I'm the kind of person, and it has to do with sensitivity too, where I find it so fruitful to engage it in my physiology, right? Like even when I talk, I use my hands and God, and if I'm on my walk and I'm talking, my hands are moving, or I'm physiologically engaging movement through the emotions. Okay, and there are people that have certain exercises they can share with you, train you in. Now, before I get to that quote, as far as somatic, I encourage people, don't just do that without also doing the emotional work, because they work together. I remember one time I was I was in a session, and a husband and wife, and the wife said, we're talking about dad issues and stuff. She goes, I'm good with my dad. I did a primal screaming exercise and I let it all out and I'm good. Okay. All right. I got it. But it was very, very evident we needed to do some work there. So it's not just something that's like one and done, or just that without doing the cognitive, doing the thinking, feeling work as well too. I'm going to quote Pete Walker because this was a great quote. I encourage you to be wary of somatic approaches that claim to heal CPTSD without working on the cognitive and emotional levels described above. Some approaches, in fact, blanketly dismiss cognitive work in a way that sidesteps the crucial work of shrinking the inner critic. Some approaches also believe that their techniques eliminate the fundamental necessity of grieving the loss of childhood. And he goes on to some other areas as well there too. So just things to be aware of. Then there's aspects because nutrition, exercise, and those kind of things can be helpful as well too. And a lot of that comes under the umbrella of complementary and alternative medicine kind of approaches. This is focusing on the mind-body connection because trauma can also lead to health challenges, digestive issues, fibromyalgia, autoimmune, right? Chronic pain. I'm not saying trauma is the only reason. I don't like giving silver bullet root reasons to problems when they're multifaceted. Okay, just saying. But the emphasis here can be nutrition, which I'm a big, big believer. Nutritional realignment for me has been life-changing. There's things like massage therapy, relaxation techniques, even exercise, which for me, the best for me is taking a nice walk. I go for a walk every day. And it's good for some of my health issues, but it's good for just overall, I feel like I think differently after it. Or even practice of meditation. And I have a video on that you can watch, a biblical meditation for those of you that are concerned or, you know, where the branches are going to go in that. Is this healthy? Is this biblically okay? Okay. So when it comes to medications, I'll say this briefly because I have a whole talk on it. A common thing people will be prescribed is an SSRI, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. And I talk about it and I explain it, Prozac, Zoloft, Paxil. And it's often used for people where you have hyperarousal struggles and significant mood issues that make working through it very, very difficult. And so I do make room for someone for a season utilizing it if they're just so unable to be regulated to do the work. Because I had people even in my congregation. I was like, don't quit your meds, right? Just yet, right? I mean, your decision's your decision, but don't hear it from me. Just quit your meds. Let's do the work. And so if I can get them stabilized enough to get taught and listen and work through, then we can start navigating through. Now, this is research. Do the research yourself, but benzodiazepines, not a good recommendation for trauma. And there's a lot of problems with benzodiazepines. And many of you have written to me of the excruciating pain of recovering from withdrawals. This is the Valium, Xanax, Klonopin. Those are the common ones. It's more fast acting. You know, it's a common cultural term. I got to take a Xanax. In 2012, there was benzos were reclassified as harmful for PTSD because they're highly addictive and they can actually prolong the healing process, and withdrawal can be very, very challenging. It can, in some cases, increase irritability and sleep disturbance, right? So we live in a culture that looks to medication, and we do live in a mental health society where practitioners often use medication very, very quickly. I believe it's overdone, overutilized. Stimulants gets into like the ADHD kind of world, the Adderall, Ritalin aspect. And maybe at some point I'll talk about that, where they believe it causes a direct release of norepinephrine. Again, a lot of this is still theories as far as what exactly it's targeting. But stimulants, the reason I bring this up is they can increase anxiety. So it's just helpful for you to be aware of that. But I encourage you, go to my broadcast on medication and walk through that, because I think it'll be helpful to arm you in a better way. Because I tried to provide some very, very helpful. That was years and years in the making. I pray that will be a blessing to your journey. All right. So in beginning to land this talk and give you some closing thoughts, what I wanted to do was I actually wanted to read an article written by a therapist and her name is Dr. Lauren Mitchell Ramirez. She wrote an article on counseling through suffering. I'd actually like to take a minute and read it because I found some of the things that she shared in it to be helpful in understanding and having some perspective on the healing journey. She writes, "Suffering is inescapable. As a private practice owner and therapist, it is something I walk in every day in the counseling realm. Everyone suffers in both micro and macro ways. I work with people experiencing depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, various forms of trauma, and the list continues. Suffering is heavy. Some people get stuck in it, some people sit in it, and some people run from it. As a counselor, it is my job to help navigate through the quicksand of suffering. I go at the pace of the client, to the depths they are willing to go. We look at suffering from all angles. The whys, the unfairness, how suffering impacts choices, establishing boundaries, and learning healthy coping skills. As we move through each of these areas, I find we always seem to arrive at the same place. What do we do with the suffering? One of the main themes I explore with clients is to make meaning in suffering. Viktor Frankl, the founder of logotherapy, discussed surviving a World War II concentration camp in his book, Man's Search for Meaning, which is a pretty good book. I read it myself. Frankl stated, in some way, suffering ceases to be suffering at the moment it finds a meaning. This is a powerful statement. What is a client to do with their suffering now? Although Frankl was onto something and brought this concept into mainstream psychology, this isn't a new concept. The Bible is filled with examples of suffering and making meaning of it. Running towards peace is the next idea we focus on when walking through suffering. Suffering is turbulent and chaotic at times. Peace seems like a far-off concept. Pursuit of peace is to have a fixed gaze and determination of health. This is in all areas, spiritually, relationally, mentally, physically. We work on this with healthy boundaries, personally and with others, creating balance in one's life, goal setting, and the list continues. Finally, another important area we work on in the counseling realm is to do something with your suffering. Is it to pour it into others? Create a healthy family system for yourself and others? Sharing your story with others? Working on turning toward others is key. 2 Corinthians 1 says, "All praise to God, the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. God is our merciful Father and the source of all comfort. He comforts us in our troubles so that we can comfort others. When they are troubled, we will be able to give them the same comfort God has given us." One suffering story doesn't have to be hidden. It can be used for good. Overall, the journey through suffering is an arduous one, which peels back the impact on our thoughts, feelings, and behavior. But it is so important to really thrive authentically, not be bound silently by our pain. Just as I journey with a client on their path toward healing, let us not forget that God is always with us, even in our suffering. We see this demonstrated in Isaiah 43. "When you go through deep waters, I will be with you. When you go through rivers of difficulty, you will not drown. When you walk through the fire of oppression, you will not be burned up. The flames will not consume you." True healing brings hope, peace, and purpose. Let us rest in the scripture of John 16. "I have told you all this so that you may have peace in me. Here on earth you have many trials and sorrows, but take heart, because I have overcome the world." I pray that blesses and encourages you in your journey. Let me give you some takeaways. When it comes to walking through the process and working through trauma, is you have to see this as a journey and as a process. You have to see this as something that works in layers. As I mentioned earlier, not focusing on trying to find quick fixes, but layer by layer, continuing the learning journey. Something I want to leave with you too, when it comes to an approach for trauma, because I'll talk more and even some Christian approaches about trauma. The question that you may want to ask is, am I comfortable with this approach? And when I talk to somebody, they might think, well, wait, Mark, as a Christian, shouldn't we think, is this theologically okay? And I understand that question. But they don't ask themselves, am I comfortable with this approach? Because that's how much important I think rapport is, and trust, and respecting where someone's at. As I mentioned in the letter, she said she goes with where they're willing to go. So I think that's something important, because you may want to take some time to learn about an approach and ask yourself, what are some of my convictions about this? And how do I feel? And the person that I'm receiving the help from. It's important that you feel a sense of trust that you can build there. Which leads me to this point, which is establishing rapport and trust with those who you help is important. So when I say you, I don't mean you listening to this. I mean the person who's giving you help, the person who's providing the help. That having a sense of safety, having a sense where like they respect and they honor your journey. In fact, in my coaching work, I did this for years. I had a video I would play for somebody to watch. And I said, if listening to me, looking into these eyes and the way that I talk and the way that I address things, if you feel like this could be helpful from your journey, and hey, I could learn from a guy like that, then hey, maybe that would be a good fit. Because I have a high value for respecting where people are at, but also realizing I'm not for everybody. I'm not the Superman for everybody. I'm not Superman for anybody, but I'm not necessarily a good fit. And I think that it takes a journey to find a good fit. A safe, compassionate care worker is going to help you to develop a safe relationship with yourself. And they're going to want to take time to build that rapport and build that trust. And trust takes time to be earned. In my pastoral work, I respected trust. So like, you don't have to jump into this way intensely at first. We can take time to get to know us. In fact, I've had to encourage Christians, we all need to learn how to get to know one another in a sequence and taking our time. The sad thing is many clinicians, just as they're getting to know someone, the person moves on for whatever reason, And, but I give yourself time to build rapport, to build trust, because that is very, very important. And another thing I want to say is don't let an unhelpful experience prevent you from seeking further help. We all have those stories. Oh, man, I met with this person. Oh, it didn't go that great. And it's okay. Don't let that prevent you, because it's often a learning journey of what sources and what areas are going to be of the most help for you. And lastly, I'm going to leave you with this, is be aware of seeking to find the perfect technique. Instead of finding the perfect technique, pay attention to what is helping you. Pay attention to what is helping you connect more to the love of God, to see yourself more in love and grace, to put your journey in perspective, and to put some things into practice. Pay more attention to what is helping versus fussing to try to find that perfect thing, because I'm a believer that so many aspects of your journey are all being used as part of the package. And I've realized a lot of my not so great kind of experiences over time have been used as a part of my journey of just learning what I believe, of learning what's helpful for me, and learning also to be a beneficial help to others. You let me know what was helpful about this talk today, what added blessing to your life and your journey. Do me a favor, click that like and subscribe button. That helps out a whole lot. And feel free to go over to markdejesus.com where you can find out more about resources and materials. In fact, you can click on the topics page and it has indexed all the episodes I did on trauma and episodes I will continue to do. So it's a blessing to be a brother from another mother. And Lord willing, and the creek don't rise. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll be back with more insights for your healing and freedom journey. But in the meantime, I'm out.